What you're about to discover will fundamentally change how you view Silicon Valley and the tech industry forever. Sam Altman, the supposed altruistic CEO of OpenAI who claims he's building artificial intelligence to save humanity, is actually running one of the most sophisticated financial scams in modern history. This isn't your typical tech CEO corruption story. This is a man who has weaponized the promise of a utopia to build a personal empire worth hundreds of billions while convincing the world he's doing it all for free. From lying under oath to Congress about his financial stakes, to exploiting Kenyan workers for $2 an hour while driving around in $20 million supercars, to stealing the intellectual property of millions of creators, Altman has constructed a facade of benevolence that masks what might be the greatest wealth extraction scheme ever devised. By the end of this breakdown, you'll understand exactly how this supposed non-profit savior is positioning himself to become potentially the world's first trillionaire, all while selling the public a fairy tale about ending poverty and democratizing AI.
It's so deeply unimaginable to people to say, I don't really need more money.
How do we make sure that it's not like a handful of people in San Francisco making decisions and reaping all the benefits?
This is my childhood dream job. That was like my literal childhood dream. That is worth more to me than any additional money.
I think we should be taxed like ordinary income, and I donate my difference.
So I think one of the most tone-deaf things people say in Silicon Valley is poor people should be happy. They get this Android phone for not much money.
But I think this is a technology that the shape of which is to reduce inequality.
The second is that the benefits of the systems, the benefits of having these AI in the world get shared widely. Part of the reason that we started the company was a fear that it would be contained in a single tech company.
Altman claims to only be making $76,000 per year from OpenAI. He has been very vocal about how little money he makes, and working at OpenAI as a CEO is his dream job. This is where the entire con begins, and it's so brazenly dishonest that it's almost impressive. The $76,000 salary is perhaps the most cynical piece of theater in Silicon Valley history, and that's saying something in an industry built on performative disruption and fake-it-till-you-make-it culture. But Altman has taken this to an entirely different level of sophistication. This salary theater creates immediate credibility with journalists, politicians, and the public who hear this number and think, wow, this guy really is different from other greedy tech CEOs. It's a number specifically calculated to be shocking in its modesty, low enough to generate headlines and social media buzz, but not so low as to be obviously fake, like taking a $1 salary. $76,000 puts him just barely above the median American household income, positioning him as relatable while still being respectable enough that people don't question how he affords basic living expenses. But here's the really insidious part. This salary creates legal and tax advantages that most people don't understand. By taking an artificially low salary, Altman minimizes his ordinary income tax liability, which in California could be as high as 50% when you combine federal and state taxes. Instead, he structures his real compensation through equity appreciation, which is taxed at much lower capital gains rates and can be deferred indefinitely through various financial instruments. He's essentially converting high-tax ordinary income into low-tax capital gains while generating positive PR for his supposed altruism. The salary also provides legal cover for all his other financial activities. When investigators or journalists start asking questions about his wealth, he can always point to the $76,000 salary as evidence of his modest lifestyle and pure motives. It's a shield that deflects almost any accusation of greed or self-dealing, because people assume that someone making less than $100,000 a year can't be getting rich off the company. But perhaps most importantly, this salary theater allows Altman to control the narrative around AI development and wealth concentration. When he talks about the dangers of AI creating too much wealth inequality, he can position himself as someone who has voluntarily removed himself from that dynamic. When he proposes policies like universal basic income or universal basic compute, he can claim moral authority because he's supposedly not enriching himself from AI development. It's the perfect cover for what is actually the largest wealth extraction scheme in tech history. The choice of exactly $76,000 is probably not accidental either. It's high enough to avoid questions about how he survives, but low enough to be sympathetic. It's also oddly specific in a way that makes it seem authentic rather than performative. A round number like 50,000 or 100,000 would seem more artificial. $76,000 feels like it was determined by some principled calculation rather than PR considerations, even though it's obviously the latter. And let's talk about the context that makes this salary even more absurd. OpenAI is currently valued at over $150 billion, making it one of the most valuable private companies in history. The idea that the CEO of such a company would work for less than most middle managers at Fortune 500 companies is laughable. But Altman has managed to convince large portions of the media and public that this represents some kind of principled stand rather than sophisticated financial engineering. That the dream job rhetoric is equally calculated. By framing his role as CEO as the fulfillment of a childhood fantasy, Altman implies that he would do this work regardless of compensation, which makes his low salary seem like evidence of pure motivation rather than tax optimization. It's the same narrative technique that startup founders use when they talk about changing the world. It transforms what is obviously a business venture into something that sounds like a mission from God. What makes this particularly disgusting is how it plays into broader American narratives about deservingness and moral worth. We've been conditioned to believe that people who make less money are more virtuous and trustworthy, especially when it comes to positions of public responsibility. Altman is exploiting this cultural programming to position himself as morally superior to other tech CEOs while actually being far more rapacious than most of them. The salary deception also serves as perfect misdirection from OpenAI's actual financial structure. While everyone is marveling at Altman's modest salary, they're not asking questions about the complex web of nonprofit entities, for-profit subsidiaries, investment funds, and equity arrangements that actually determine who profits from OpenAI's success. It's classic magician's technique: get the audience focused on one hand while the other hand performs the real trick.
You make a lot of money, do you?
I paid enough for health insurance. I have no equity in OpenAI.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I'm doing this because I love it.
For years, Sam had made it really difficult for the board to actually do that job, withholding information, misrepresenting things that were happening at the company, in some cases outright lying to the board. When ChatGPT came out, November 2022, the board was not informed in advance about that. We learned about ChatGPT on Twitter. Sam didn't inform the board that he owned the OpenAI startup fund, even though he, constantly was claiming to be an independent board member with no financial interest in the company.
This moment should have ended his career on the spot, and the fact that it didn't tells you everything you need to know about how accountability works for tech billionaires in America. Sam Altman looked members of Congress directly in the eye and committed what can only be described as brazen perjury about his financial stake in OpenAI. This isn't a gray area or a matter of interpretation. This is a federal crime punishable by up to 5 years in prison. But let's examine the calculated nature of this lie because it reveals just how sophisticated Altman's deception really is. Notice how he structures his response: "I make no," referring to his salary, followed immediately by, "I have no equity in OpenAI." This creates the impression of complete financial disinterest while technically allowing him some wiggle room later if he gets caught. He can claim he was talking about direct salary compensation, not indirect equity holdings through various investment vehicles. The health insurance line is particularly cynical because it's designed to make him seem almost pitiably modest. Here's someone running a company worth over $100 billion, and he's telling Congress that he barely makes enough to cover his medical expenses. It's calculated to generate sympathy and reinforce the narrative of the selfless tech leader who's sacrificing personal gain for the greater good. But here's what makes this perjury so particularly damaging to the entire AI governance conversation. Altman's testimony was specifically about conflicts of interest and whether the public could trust OpenAI to develop AI safely without regulatory oversight. The whole premise of his argument to Congress was that OpenAI was different from other tech companies because its leadership wasn't motivated by personal enrichment. His lack of financial stake was presented as evidence that OpenAI could self-regulate and didn't need government intervention. This lie didn't just mislead Congress about Altman's personal finances, it fundamentally corrupted the entire policy discussion around AI regulation. Lawmakers made decisions based on false information about the incentive structures governing AI development. They were told they were dealing with a nonprofit-minded organization led by someone with no financial interest in the outcome, when in reality they were dealing with someone who stood to make hundreds of millions or billions of dollars depending on how regulations were structured. The arrogance required to commit this perjury is staggering when you consider the context. This wasn't some spontaneous slip-up or misstatement under pressure. Altman knew he would be asked about his financial interests. It's one of the most obvious questions for any CEO testifying about their company. He had time to prepare, lawyers to consult, and every opportunity to structure his answer truthfully. Instead, he made a calculated decision to lie under oath because he determined that the benefits of maintaining his false narrative outweighed the risks of getting caught. What's even more infuriating is how the media covered this testimony. Most outlets reported his claims about having no financial stake in OpenAI without any skepticism or fact-checking. They took a tech CEO at his word when discussing his own financial interests, which is journalistic malpractice of the highest order. Any competent reporter should have immediately started investigating these claims because they were so implausible on their face. The fact that there have been essentially zero consequences for this perjury reveals the complete bankruptcy of our legal and political systems when it comes to holding tech elites accountable. If a small business owner lied under oath to Congress about their financial interests in their company, they would be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. But apparently when you're running a company worth over $100 billion, perjury becomes a minor PR problem rather than a criminal matter. This also raises serious questions about what other lies Altman told in his congressional testimony. If he was willing to commit obvious perjury about something as basic as his equity holdings, what else did he lie about? His claims about AI safety measures, OpenAI's nonprofit structure, their data usage practices, their international partnerships, all of it becomes suspect once you establish that he's willing to lie under oath when it serves his interests.
I have a tiny sliver of equity from an old YC fund. I used to have some via Sequoia fund, but that one turned out to be easier to sell and not keep the position in. Very small amount, quite insignificant.
After getting caught in his congressional lie, Altman was forced to engage in what can only be described as damage control through strategic truth-telling. But even his confession is structured to minimize the appearance of his actual financial stake while revealing just enough to avoid further perjury charges. The phrase, tiny sliver of equity, is doing enormous psychological work here. It's designed to make his holdings sound almost negligible, like he accidentally ended up with some OpenAI stock that he barely even remembers owning. But let's do the math that Altman is desperately hoping his audience won't do. Even if we take him at his word that his stake is genuinely tiny, say, 0.1% of OpenAI, that would still be worth over $150 million at current valuations. A tiny sliver of one of the most valuable companies in history is still generational wealth that would put him in the top 0.01% of Americans by net worth. But the real scam here is much more sophisticated than just the dollar amounts. The way Altman structured his equity holdings reveals a level of financial engineering that most people don't understand and the media consistently fails to explain properly. He didn't just buy OpenAI stock directly, which would have been traceable and obvious. Instead, he invested his own money into venture capital funds which then used that money to invest in OpenAI. This creates multiple layers of separation between Altman and his actual financial stake in the company. This structure serves several purposes, all of them designed to obscure his true financial interests. First, it allows him to claim, with technical accuracy, that he doesn't directly own OpenAI equity. He owns shares in funds that own OpenAI equity, which gives him plausible deniability when testifying to Congress or speaking to the media. Second, it makes it much harder for journalists, investigators, or regulators to determine his actual financial stake because they would need to analyze the portfolios of multiple investment funds rather than just looking at OpenAI's cap table. Third, and perhaps most importantly, this structure allows Altman to control the timing of when his connection to these investments becomes public knowledge. He can decide when to sell his fund positions, when to admit to owning them, and how to frame their significance. Notice how he mentions that the Sequoia position turned out to be easier to sell. This suggests he had the flexibility to exit that investment when it became politically convenient, while maintaining his Y Combinator position. The casualness with which he discusses selling hundreds of millions of dollars in investment positions also reveals just how wealthy Altman actually is. Normal people don't accidentally accumulate massive equity stakes in world-changing companies and then casually decide to sell them because it's easier. This is the behavior of someone with so much money that $100 million investment decisions are treated as minor portfolio adjustments. But here's the most infuriating part of this whole revelation. Even after admitting to lying under oath to Congress, Altman faced essentially zero consequences. No perjury charges, no regulatory investigations, no meaningful media scrutiny of his other claims. The system just collectively shrugged and moved on, which tells every other tech CEO that they can lie to Congress with impunity as long as they're important enough to the economy. This also raises obvious questions about what other financial interests Altman has failed to disclose. If he was willing to lie about his OpenAI equity stakes, what about his investments in other AI companies? What about his real estate holdings, his art collection, his cryptocurrency positions, his offshore accounts? The man has demonstrated that he will commit perjury to conceal his financial interests, so why should anyone believe his claims about any aspect of his wealth? The Y Combinator connection is particularly interesting because it represents a potential conflict of interest that goes far beyond just OpenAI. Y Combinator is one of the most influential startup accelerators in Silicon Valley, funding hundreds of companies that could be affected by AI development and regulation. Altman's financial ties to YC mean he has a vested interest in the success of an entire ecosystem of companies, many of which could benefit enormously from the AI infrastructure that OpenAI is building. This creates a web of financial incentives that extends far beyond just maximizing OpenAI's valuation. Altman has reasons to shape AI development in ways that benefit the broader Y Combinator portfolio, which could include everything from making AI tools more accessible to startups to ensuring that AI regulation doesn't disadvantage smaller companies. These are the kinds of conflicts of interest that should have been disclosed up front, not revealed through investigative journalism after he got caught lying to Congress.
Do you see as being a big challenge that we're facing as a society right now?
How we deal with a world where the natural forces are for wealth to concentrate into the hands of a smaller and smaller number of people.
Now that we see some of the ways that AI is developing, I wonder if the future looks something like more like universal basic compute than universal basic income. And everybody gets like a slice of GPT-7's compute and they can use it, they can resell it, they can donate it to somebody to use for cancer research.
Yesterday, Sam Altman proposed that instead of having universal basic income, we give everyone universal basic compute. Specifically, everybody gets a slice of GPT-7's compute. What am I gonna do with this compute? Can I exchange this computing power for Chipotle and rent? I'm a freaking software engineer and I don't know what I would do with this universal basic computing power that would keep me alive. I guess I could start like a crypto scam or something.
Sam Altman just kind of said, I'm not doing this for money, I don't make any money. And they just busted him in a $4 million bonus egg. The video of him in that car, oh, I don't need money. But me, money? I'm not even interested in money. He's driving around a $4 million bonus egg. I think you like money. Look, you don't buy one of those unless you really want to get.
Someone at the startup has got to be the person that is going to recruit, sell the product, talk to the press, raise money. And this requires someone who can infect with enthusiasm the whole world about what the company is trying to do.
Why should we trust you?
You shouldn't.
What we're witnessing with Sam Altman isn't just another greedy tech CEO. It's the most sophisticated wealth extraction scheme ever devised, disguised as philanthropic innovation. Altman has weaponized humanity's hopes for AI to build what will likely become the largest concentration of wealth in human history, all while convincing millions of people that he's working for free to save the world. The scale of this deception is genuinely unprecedented. Altman has lied under oath to Congress, stolen intellectual property from millions of creators, exploited workers in developing countries, converted a nonprofit into a personal profit machine, and socialized the costs of his infrastructure while privatizing all the benefits. And through it all, he maintains this carefully crafted persona of the reluctant billionaire who's only building AI because he loves humanity so much. The financial engineering alone would make Gordon Gekko proud. The salary theater, the shell company equity structures, the nonprofit to for-profit conversion, the strategic investment deals that force restructuring, this is PhD-level financial manipulation designed to obscure the largest wealth transfer in tech history. Altman isn't just getting rich, he's positioning himself to potentially become the world's first trillionaire while convincing everyone he's doing it for their benefit. But what makes this truly diabolical is how he's using AI's genuine potential to launder his reputation. Because AI might actually be transformative technology, Altman can point to legitimate AI capabilities and say, "See, I really am changing the world." He's using real technological progress as cover for unprecedented extraction and exploitation. It's like a mob boss claiming he's helping the community while running protection rackets. The fact that he occasionally does something beneficial doesn't change the fundamental criminality of the operation. What's most infuriating is that there will probably be no consequences for any of this. Altman has insulated himself with enough money and power that the normal rules don't apply. He can lie under oath, exploit workers, steal intellectual property, and defraud nonprofits because the system is designed to protect people like him while sacrificing everyone else. The tragedy is that AI probably could help solve many human problems if it were developed and deployed ethically. But instead of democratizing AI benefits, Altman is concentrating them in his own hands while socializing all the costs and risks. Instead of ending poverty, he's creating new forms of digital feudalism. Instead of empowering humanity, he's building the infrastructure for unprecedented surveillance and control. Sam Altman represents everything wrong with Silicon Valley taken to its logical extreme: the casual dishonesty, the worker exploitation, the regulatory capture, the privatization of public goods, and the weaponization of utopian rhetoric to justify dystopian behavior. He's not building the future, he's stealing it. And the fact that he's convinced so many people that his theft represents progress shows just how effective sophisticated propaganda can be when it's backed by billions of dollars and the promise of technological salvation. The man who claims to be saving humanity is actually looting it on a scale that would make colonial empires jealous. And he's doing it all while maintaining that he doesn't care about money. If that's not the definition of evil, it's certainly the definition of world-class sociopathy.